Monday was Singles Day in China. For those of you who are not familiar, it's a very popular holiday with a lot of sales, retail sales, consumer sales. And so the headlines were that there was a lot of great retail sales, consumer sales, stores were busy in the major cities. And also good news for China is that the Chinese Yuan, the exchange rate to the dollar, is almost back below 7 again. It's at 7.003. However, beneath the surface, there is a lot more red flags. I want to give a hat tip to Wall Street for Main Street podcast listener Dano, who is in mainland China. He sent me this article from the Financial Times. It came out on November 10th. It's from Sun Yu in Beijing, the article writer. And the article is called Contractors Hit as China Local Government Defaults Rise. Slowing economy puts strain on public finances and raises risk of social unrest. So this is the article, China's local governments face a record number of lawsuits for failing to pay their contractors as the country's slowing economy, despite what I'm saying here with the great retail sales numbers that came out today. China also had very bad car sales for both regular cars. It continues to get worse each month for over a year now. Declining electric vehicle sales too. But I guess if Elon Musk is in bed with the Chinese government, I guess that's not a problem. Their contractor, and he's not paying for the Shanghai Gigafactory, I guess that's not a problem for him either. Lawsuits for failing to pay their contractors as the country's slowing economy puts a strain on public finances. So I'll reread that because I got a little sidetracked there. China's local governments face a record number of lawsuits for failing to pay their contractors as the country's slowing economy puts a strain on public finances. So this article is going to confirm a lot of what I've been hearing from different sources, whether that's Michael Pettis, whether that's the New York Times article that came out about $200 billion worth of IOUs floating around the Chinese economy that came out. That article came out, I think, in early August. So I've been hearing these stories from different sources from July, August, September, October, and this article is confirming it even more. Also, recently, there was another Wall Street Journal article that cited the amount of bankruptcies of companies in mainland China filing for bankruptcies, bankruptcy, not just governments that are getting sued, but there's a ton of bankruptcies. The amount has exploded of firms, private sector companies in mainland China filing for bankruptcy. Okay, back to the article. The financial outlook has deteriorated so markedly that analysts have warned that there is a risk of social unrest. Chinese courts have listed 831 local governments as being in default in the first 10 months of this year, compared with only 100 in all of 2018. So 2018, there was only 100. The year is not over yet, and there's already 831. It is already up over eightfold. The value of these local authorities' overdue payments grew by more than 50%, from 4.1 billion RMB at the end of last year to 6.9 billion RMB at the end of October. And this does not count if you read China's Great Wall of Debt and you go back. That book's available on Audible audiobook, or you can go and listen to the interview I did over the summer with the author Denny McMahon, who lived in China for 10 years, speaks fluent Mandarin. And we talk about the LGFVs, local government finance vehicles. This is where a lot of the as bad as this government debt is, the government's moved even more of this debt off balance sheet. So it's part of the shadow banking system. Okay, continuing with the article, the totals do not take into account the amount owed by local government finance vehicles. There we go. And companies operated by municipal or provincial officials, more than 1,000 of which have been listed as defaulters over the past 3 years. The amount in the local government finance vehicles, from what I'm hearing from different sources, is in the trillions. The large increase, many trillions. The large increase in cases provides a glimpse into the worsening financial position of many Chinese local governments as they struggle to revive economic growth that fell to a 30-year low of 6% in the third quarter. Remember, we've been getting warnings not only from Premier Li in September, but also in the last couple weeks from Xi, warning about black swans and white rhinos. Or is it gray rhinos? It's something rhinos. It's not Winnie the Pooh, it's rhinos. Anyway, the surge in government defaulters could lead to a social crisis, with workers taking to the street and protesting against official agencies. That's the worst case scenario for Beijing, said Chen Zhu, head of the Asia Global Institute at University of Hong Kong, Andrew Gilholm, director of China and Korea analysis at Control Risks, a consultancy, also sounded a warning. If more frequent high-profile defaults impact social stability and government credibility, it will become a national problem, albeit one that looks unlikely now, Mr. Gilholm said. Local governments are registered as defaulters after failing to follow court orders to pay. Most of the defaults have occurred in counties and towns that are known to be operating under a tighter budget than cities and provinces. Lu Kun, China's finance minister, said in March that it would be, quote, a major political task to ease financial stress among county and township governments. China's lower tier governments are under financial stress because their revenue falls far short of their rising public expenditure obligations in areas such as education and healthcare. Local governments, for example, spent 3.9 trillion RMB on education in 2017, up from 1.1 trillion RMB a decade ago. That has forced many cash-strapped governments to pay vendors on credit, or IOUs, said Wang Jianshu, a Beijing-based lawyer who has represented contractors on government default cases. So there's also, from what I've been hearing, Michael Pettis, and also that New York Times article from August. Michael Pettis, if you don't know who he is, you can follow him on Twitter. He's lived in mainland China for over a decade too. I think he used to teach at Peking University. And there's been government employees and a lot of other people associated with these local governments who are not getting paid. The large banks have been asked by Beijing and the People's Bank of China. One of the two largest Chinese state-owned enterprise banks has been asked to already do a $300 billion bailout over 5 years for Hunan province, because Hunan province is that deep in the hole. So not only are the four largest Chinese state-owned enterprise banks asked to bail out small and medium-sized banks, they're being asked to bail out even more things. And I've documented over the last couple months, the protests for pensioners who weren't getting paid. Those are the local governments, I think, who are supposed to pay that pension. I don't think it's Beijing. I think it's local governments for the pensioners. There was video going around of the pensioners protesting. So, back to the article, when you become a government contractor, you don't expect to get paid once your work is completed, said Mr. Wang. You expect an IOU now and an uncertain payment date. Wow. How are people going to survive? How are people going to survive in mainland China? Yes, they do have, some of them do have high savings. However, the price of pork is going crazy. The articles I'm seeing on food inflation, stagflation, the price of pork, even the official Chinese data for the price of pork is nuts. Pork prices have more than doubled year on year, according to China's own National Bureau of Statistics. Largest amount of inflation, according to China's own National Bureau of Statistics, in nearly 8 years, since 2012. Okay, China's economic slowdown is putting extra stress on local governments that have seen fiscal revenue growth in the first 3 quarters of this year fall to 3.1%, an 11-year low. And this doesn't deal with the dollar-denominated debt and all the other problems and the local government finance vehicles, which are basically like dummy corporations and off-balance sheet stuff and shadow banking shenanigans and nonsense that has been going on in China with their credit bubble and real estate bubble. There's so many people that have gambled on real estate, so many entities, and these local governments are so dependent on land sales to raise capital. In the eastern province, so if the real estate bubble slows down, that would really hurt local governments even more. In the eastern province of Shandong, the Honghe town government has no firm plans to service 26 million RMB of the debt it owes to a local real estate developer, despite a court ruling that the payment must be made by May. We will pay off the debt when we have more funds available, said the official. Some large cities are also being sued for failure to pay. A court ruling last month named Nanqing, capital of the eastern province of Jiangxi, a defaulter after the city reneged on a payment of 161 million RMB. Making government entities pay their bills is challenging. There is no official guidance on seizing government assets to settle overdue payments. China's political regime prioritizes party control over rule of law, and local governments face few consequences if they decide not to pay. I can't think of a single official being punished for failing to pay contractors, said Mr. Wang, the Beijing lawyer. They are above the law. So, beneath the surface, more bad news out of China. You're going to see the headlines that China had a great retail and consumer day. You're going to see supposedly Xinhua, the newspaper, one of the news propaganda news agencies out of China, was talking up Bitcoin and blockchain technology. Remember, they could have, as early as November 11th, this was a couple months ago that I reported on this, and obviously November 11th has passed. They were talking about that they could have instituted the crypto yuan. It looks like things may be delayed a little bit, but they are getting there's tons of different sources confirming that it's coming soon now. I've seen a lot of different sources in the last couple weeks and month all over the place that it's coming soon. So, despite the exchange rate improving in China, the RMB is not going crazy devalued right now. Despite the retail numbers, things beneath the surface getting bad, getting worse. Very interesting too. Props to Greg Hunter for finally having someone on. Warren Pollock, I think, a couple years ago, I think he was praising China. I don't remember him criticizing China a few years ago. And he went on Greg Hunter's channel, and he was very critical of China. You know, Greg Hunter is going to get he's going to get attacked by trolls for that. But he's very courageous to do that. Props to him, and props to Warren Pollock for doing that, for criticizing all the crazy things that are going on now. The crypto yuan integrates with full totalitarian government, the social credit score system, cashless society. Yeah, I agree, it's evil. People should have a choice to buy Bitcoin or not buy Bitcoin. A government shouldn't be banning cash and then implementing a government cryptocurrency so there's a centralized database of all your debit card and credit card purchases. They can see all the food you buy, alcohol, you know, anything you buy online. In China, you know, porn would be bad. American or Japanese porn would be looked at as bad, or a VPN service would be looked at as bad. We're getting very Orwellian here. I even think Orwell would, if Orwell was still alive, I think he would be surprised at how technology is advancing with these 500 megapixel digital cameras with artificial intelligence that China has, and how many TV cameras, these closed circuit TVs that integrate with all these software programs, and they can scan thousands of faces in the crowd at once, and you can't hide your face anymore. Facial recognition software. Some of these cities in China have like many millions of cameras each. There's estimates of over 200 million cameras, spy cameras, and tracking cameras in China, but I've heard from my top source in China that number is low, and it's actually over 600 million cameras. Yeah, crypto yuan scares me. Euros, they're talking about crypto euro too. They're obviously behind China on that. I don't know if China removed all the subsidies yet on electric vehicles. They were talking about removing the subsidies. I know they cut the subsidies, so I think there was a cut in subsidies. I don't think they were all gone. I would have to double check on that. Rob says China's economy is built on a foundation of quicksand. I would agree. It's built on tens of trillions in misallocation of credit bubble, real estate bubble, Keynesian make work jobs programs, as my Austrian school economist friends would tell me. So what if local governments default? Well, the workers don't have money for food, and the food prices, especially pork prices, are rising like crazy. And not all Chinese people have this 40% savings number that's still claimed. Okay, so I have a bunch of other China articles here. those are just the main ones I wanted to talk about, with the pork prices going crazy. I think pork prices on one of the measurements, according to Zero Hedge last week, were up over 173% so far this year already. Zero Hedge called it pork hyperinflation. I don't know if I'd call 173% increase in under a year hyperinflation. I would just call that maybe really bad stagflation. The definition of hyperinflation is normally a lot more than that. Todd says even tier 3 and tier 4 cities have cameras everywhere. Yes, I've heard the same thing. Yeah, so if you jaywalk and you run a you crosswalk, you cross a street when you're not supposed to, the facial recognition cameras will automatically take the money out of your WeChat Pay or Alipay account. There's no protesting that. Martin says the situation is familiar with Canada, where the federal debt is not that big, but provinces are almost bankrupt. Well, Martin, I don't think the politicians in those provinces were anywhere near as corrupt as some of the stories I've heard from about these politicians in some of these provinces in China. Whether it was the guy a couple months ago, the Chinese politician that was that had secret vaults under his mansion, and he had 13 tons of physical gold that he could not get out of mainland China. He couldn't get it out of the country. Over $500 million worth of physical gold was in a secret vault under his house. He also had $42 billion in another vault next to it worth of printed RMB. That is nuts. I think the guy is going to get executed. I think I heard that. I'm not sure. I don't even know if he gets a trial. Yeah, at this point, it's just about, well, something will collapse in the next couple years. It's emerging markets, China, corporate bond, junk bonds here in the U.S. The shale boom could go bust very soon. Chesapeake Energy was the worst of the bunch. I remember 12 months ago, I was looking at shares of Chesapeake. They were like 3 something a share. And I was like, this thing's probably going to zero in a year or two. People were telling me, oh, Chesapeake's a bargain. I was looking at their balance sheet and the debt. I was like, no, it's not. That's way too much of a risk for me. Yeah, I think China's getting killed with... as bad as stagflation is here in the U.S., I think China's getting killed with even worse stagflation than the U.S. So you have now... in the last couple months, to wrap it up here in the short little podcast, I'll put all these articles here if you want to read this more in depth. But to wrap things up here, you have, in August, you have the New York Times story of $200 billion worth of IOUs floating around the Chinese economy because the state-owned enterprises are not paying their bills on time or at all. And then Michael Pettis more recently was saying it's not just the state-owned enterprises that aren't paying their bills on time, it's the local governments and it's government workers and teachers, those people. Not everyone, not every single province is not paying their bills on time, but there's a growing amount of them. And then recently, that just came out on November 10th, a couple days ago now, since this is a late night podcast. I wasn't feeling well earlier today. I feel a lot better now that I got my workout in. And then you have that talking more about all these lawsuits. So it's beneath the surface. There's an immense amount of problems in China. So hopefully Greg Hunter and Peter Schiff and some of these others will start to recognize this and see that, you know, China's not going to crash the dollar and go to a gold standard, you know, all those things. China's got an immense amount of problems too. Every major country does. The US has a lot of problems. The European Union has a lot of problems. Japan has a lot of problems. Emerging markets are a disaster. And China has a lot of problems too. I also think China doesn't respect private property rights, especially for foreigners. I think there's a lot of evidence of that, whether it's the China Hustle documentary or many other examples. Peter Schiff thinks China is in the best shape. And his opinion has not changed in 10 years despite the facts changing. Look, I really respect Peter. I think he's a very smart guy. He's just wrong on this. 100% wrong. If China crashes, what will be the impact on a global scale? Koises asks. Well, I think first, demand for a lot of commodities like energy, oil, energy, base metals would fall a lot more. You'd see a lot of you'd see prices of base metals and energy fall. No, I don't think anything can decouple. None of these economies can. The US can't decouple, China can't decouple, the European Union can't decouple, emerging markets can't decouple, Japan can't decouple. Everything's integrated. Just study the just-in-time supply chain. And how much credit is in the commercial paper market it takes, and all these different parts in the supply chain to get food to the grocery store. How many different countries and companies are involved just making an iPhone. So the iPhone is assembled, or at least it, well, I don't know if Apple's going to be switching where they manufacture the iPhones yet. I think they are moving some of the manufacturing facilities back here to the US. But as of now, they still manufacture in China. But China only assembles the iPhone, and I think I heard Jim Rickard say recently that China only accounts for about 6% of the manufacturing in the iPhone. They only assemble it, and that China has to import materials from Japan, materials from Germany, materials from the US, materials from South Korea to get all the iPhone components and then assemble it in China. Well, Dan says he's one of the few foreign guys who have won a fraud and IP lawsuit in mainland China. Took 3 courts in Shanghai. You won, but you didn't win much. What were your legal bills? Your legal bills were more than what you won? I think Apple's getting tax breaks to come back here to the US too. I think Apple's planning on moving some manufacturing back to the US. I think Mexico is going to end up benefiting a lot from this trade war, this worsen a trade war, this economic war, this economic Cold War. I think Mexico will get a lot of extra manufacturing. It is like musical chairs. The whole world is involved. Yeah, or hot potato. Either game. No one wants to get stuck at the end. Something's gonna... The next 2 or 3 years, something's gonna collapse. It's tough to tell which one is gonna be first, though. That's the thing. If I had to make an educated guess, I would say emerging markets first. Because emerging markets, not only have they leveraged their economies to exporting to China a bunch of different things, whether it's luxury consumer goods or commodities, but they're also over-leveraged to commodity prices. Especially like base metals and energy, a lot of emerging markets. And then the question is, who's holding all that bad debt that would go bad from emerging markets to dollar-denominated debt? Which European banks are holding the bad debt? And then who are the counterparties of those European banks? That would be my educated guess right now. Corporate bond market also a mess. I actually, I'm working on another project that I was looking at the yield curve, and the Fed has used brute force. The yield curve, when I looked at it a couple days ago, the yield curve was, it had uninverted. It was no longer inverted. So over the last couple month or so, the Fed has uninverted the yield curve. So that will be probably a project in the next week or so. The housing bubble, the U.S. housing bubble is, I mean, there's housing bubbles everywhere. A lot of it's Chinese money. It's not just central banks that have caused real estate prices up. A lot of it's Chinese money that has left China. Tell Peter that he must not be aware that China is bailing out and subsidizing the shipping for a lot of these manufacturers and people selling goods on Alibaba. I've gotten that confirmed, multiple sources, and then also that some of these manufacturers are getting bailouts. The loans are not being called in. Look, China has overcapacity, and there's been trillions of dollars in misallocation for these factories, and the factories are only hurting themselves because they can't sell the goods at the price, and there's inventory piling up for some of the goods that are being produced, a lot of them, and there's not as much demand for a lot of these goods. Oh, thank you, Kyle, for the kind words. I appreciate it. Are you a Patreon account contributor, Kyle? I appreciate you calling me legit. Have almost 200 Patreon account contributors. It might happen in the next week or two. It's really growing. Making my life a lot easier. Also, the dozen or so PayPal account contributors and the people who tip once in a while. Much appreciated. Then I could just focus on content and analysis, content research analysis like this. Are you going to see other people make videos with screenshots showing that the yield curve uninverted? Okay, well, that's it for tonight. I want to thank everyone for their time. All the articles will be in the information and description section after the video.